Hello, my name is Andrew Keane. Welcome to Keane on America, the daily interview show about the United States. Hello, everybody. A few months ago, we did a show with Gail Beckerman, who writes for the New York Times, on how to be a dissident. He has a new book out on that, which is doing rather well. He suggests the best way to be a dissident is to be pessimistic. And a few days ago, carrying on in that vein, we did a show with Gloria Brown Marshall about a protest history of the United States. That's the title of her new book. And carrying on in the same vein, we are talking not about protest or dissidence, but resistance. My guest today, Curtis White, a very distinguished literary thinker, what one magazine called A Splendidly Cranky Utopian, has a new book out. It's called On Resistance, a Manifesto. And Curtis is joining us from Port Townsend in Washington. Curtis, congratulations on the new book.
Thank you.
What are we resisting? Why did you write this book? Why is there a need to resist?
Oh, I was being provocative, I think. But it's an unconventional book in many ways, especially for a book called On Resistance. There's not actually much in the way of conventional politics in it. So I don't mention Donald Trump more than once or twice. And there's no discussion of party politics or the midterm elections or anything about like that. Any intervention in the sort of politics as usual. What I focus on in the book, and what I've always focused on, is cultural politics. And another way, the way that I try to talk about cultural politics, my particular version of it, is as psychic treason. And that's a term that I take from Ted Gioia's book, Music, A Subversive History. And Gioia's argument is basically that music in particular, but all of the arts really, are subversive by their nature. In other words, they're particularly, the thing that we recognize most often is the subversion of form within a particular art. So music is particularly aggressive in that way. So what I have latched onto is the idea that a certain kind of treason is sort of constantly being committed by the arts. Sometimes that treason is formal, and sometimes it's more, it blends in, it moves with, it allies itself with social movements. Now, the best and earliest example of that is the Romantics. Once the church was out of the way, the English and the German Romantics in particular sort of declared cultural war. And so you get figures like Schiller and Goethe, the Jena crowd, the Jena movement in philosophy in the late 18th and early 19th century. And of course, the English poets were, I think, what we would call now the first dropouts. They dropped out of the rigid notion of what it was possible for the children of the educated classes to do, which was either join the military, join the clergy, or run the farm back home, keep track of what the mansion and the properties are doing and collecting rents from the peasants. So figures like Wordsworth and Coleridge basically said, I'm not having anything to do with that. I'm going to go to the countryside and write poetry. So in many ways, they're an example for me.
Okay, I mean, we'll come back to this obviously in some detail in a few minutes, but from what I'm getting from you so far, Curtis, On Resistance is a cultural kind of resistance of artists, of
Right.
poets. We did a show with my old friend John Taplin recently as well, where he asked, where's the countercultural outrage to Trump? I don't want to turn this again into another conversation on Trump. He had a piece in Rolling Stone on asking whether the counterculture can rise again. Taplin was an important participant in the counterculture of the late 60s. He was Bob Dylan's tour manager. He was the producer of Martin Scorsese's Mean Streets, so he's very familiar with that. He saw this in generational terms. He wanted young Americans to get back out on the street. You're also in some ways a veteran of the 60s and of the counterculture. Right. Is On Resistance a form of nostalgia, or are you rejecting nostalgia? You began this conversation talking about Coleridge and Wordsworth. I was guessing you're probably about to come on to the Grateful Dead. Are you suggesting we just go back to the 1960s, Curtis, or the 1860s for that matter?
No, I mean, the counterculture, the 60s counterculture was huge for me personally. I grew up in the East Bay and had many formative experiences in Berkeley. And then I moved to San Francisco in the late 60s, early 70s. So yeah, that counterculture was huge for me because in my own personal experience, started in late high school, it became clear to me that what my country was, what you call America on your program, was it had lied to me, and it had shown that it was indifferent to whether or not I lived or died. That was a kind of formative insight, or enlightenment, even I would call it, for me. Then when I moved to San Francisco, I met art that didn't say these things to me, and in fact encouraged me to not go to Vietnam or whatever. So yeah, that was very important to me. But as I make clear, I think in the introduction, my position is more Nietzschean, which is to say, forget the past, move on to the next, what Nietzsche calls joyful deed. Move on to the next joyful deed. And that's what we're having so much trouble with right now. It's not about returning to the 60s. It's about how do we find that edge where we could commit the next
right. And you summarize it nicely in I know the first chapter of the book is Psychic Treason. It got published on Counterpunch last year. And I'm quoting you, and you write it in a kind of Gramscian sense, I guess. I'm living in a world that no longer exists. We're in this period between periods, I guess, an interregnum, as Gramsci describes that. Is that what you're trying to say in this book? Is that we're all in this world that no longer exists, and we want to look back, but we actually need to look forward?
Yeah, well, living in a world that no longer exists is for me, in terms of the counterculture, is true for me. It's that those years are still in my head, and I don't think they're going to go anywhere. But that's just being human. But they needn't be the world that anybody else is missing. Yeah, so the focus for me is on finding the edge and living. So I've always had this since my book, The Middle Mind. I've had this sort of motto, which has fared well for me, clarified things for me. And the motto was sort of misbehave, make something beautiful, and try to win. The making beautiful can be any number of things. It doesn't have to be art. And the trying to win is where you socialize the impulses from misbehaving.
Right, and you've written a number of books, as you say, including The Middle Mind, which did rather well. You've written The Science Delusion, Memories of My Father Watching TV, which is a great title. It's all a bit vague, though, Curtis. You're a professor of literature. You've talked about Nietzsche and Wordsworth and Coleridge and blah, blah, blah. But how are people actually supposed to resist? What exactly does this involve?
That's not for me to say.
So why write the book on
no
resistance and manifestos are supposed to be calls to action, aren't they? I mean, when one thinks, for example, of the Communist Manifesto, it was a call to get up and change the world.
Well, it's a call to self-reflection for sure, for thinking about where we are now. So, you know, you can't get to what Hegel called the absolute without knowing it. Right. So the problem isn't merely one of resisting, active resistance in the street or whatever. It's also a problem of self-understanding, of knowing who we are, of knowing what you want to see in the future, and socializing those ideas. Right now, what we really need is not to think that we can overturn the status quo. What we need right now is companions. So we need to socialize our impulses and focus that on what we can do. But you know, I'm just not the sort of person. You know, being an artist or novelist myself, I'm just not the sort of person who can tell people what they ought to be doing. That's for them to discover.
Okay, so I take your point, although, again, I wonder whether people picking up a book on resistance on a bookshelf, for example, might think that there would be, if it's a manifesto, there'd be a kind of guide. So what's okay, so I take your point, Curtis, but what is the thing that we are supposed to resist against? I don't want to turn this into a Trump conversation. So leaving aside politics, we've done many shows on our age of anxiety, for example, particularly this generational sense. Is that what we're supposed to be resisting? What are the forces that drove you to write this book on resistance?
I think I make it pretty clear in the book that the way I'm going to approach the problem is through story. And the first half of the book is basically ideology critique, speaking of Gramsci and Adorno and the Western Marxist humanist tradition. So the first half of the book is a critique of okay, if we say we want resistance, what does the culture say to us? It says you have no need for resistance because we've already provided it for you. So you have philanthropy, you have virtuous corporations, and you have the liberal tradition in politics. Those three things provide all the resistance that you need. So I spend the first half of the book critiquing that idea. The second half of the book then begins to develop at least an intellectual framework, a sensorium of what better stories we might be telling ourselves about where we are and what we ought to do.
As I said, the Paris Review once described you as a splendidly cranky utopian. So
that was actually Molly Ivins.
So Molly Ivins described you as that. Well, they're quoting her. Yeah. But in this book on resistance, is it a critique then of liberalism? You're saying that philanthropy won't help us, but so what? What else? What were the other two things apart from philanthropy?
Virtuous corporations and liberalism.
Well, virtuous corporations are probably a little bit of a straw man. I'm not sure how many people actually believe in. What you thinking about Amazon or Google or something?
Well, sure. I mean, my main example is Steve Jobs and Apple, and the way in which he first Buddha branded, counterculture branded his products as a way of inducing us to buy his products because he assumed that we already were sympathetic to that tradition.
What about companies like Patagonia, for example? And we did a show recently on seems a very decent company, bookstore.org, where you can actually buy your new book, which is redistributing revenue from book sales to back to writers and bookstores themselves. Are you suggesting that you can't be a good corporation?
The evidence would suggest that's true.
Well, I don't.
I mean, I'm happy to suggest it. I don't spend a lot of time. I mean, the Apple example and Steve Jobs is just a way for me to give an example.
Right, and that's an
about.
old example, Curtis. I mean, it's many people have made it in the past. I think even Jobs now, if he was around, probably wouldn't defend it. But I mean, what about Patagonia, for example, or as I said, bookshop.org, which is helping local bookstores survive?
Actually, Patagonia is probably an exception to the rule, and it very, very quietly does what it does. I know some people who work for Patagonia, and all the signs that all the things that they say to me make me think that it is indeed a virtuous corporation. But I would say they're an exception to the rule.
And then on philanthropy, again, there are presumably some people doing good things with their money, aren't there? Or you're suggesting that philanthropy, by definition, is a bad thing?
Oh, no. What I'm saying is that philanthropy is a form of resistance or a form of liberalism that is limited by its own need to protect the source of its money. So I give examples of especially of the relationship between the what I call the big green institutions like Sierra Club, and its relationship to actual on the spot, activists, and the way in which it comes into a site that is working on a particular problem at the grassroots level, comes into that site, sort of takes over, and limits the kind of resistance that group can offer. And this is an argument that the writer Mark Dowie makes in much greater detail than I can make here. So yeah, if you want to know how it is that philanthropy sort of assists environmental groups while also protecting the source of their wealth.
So are you suggesting, I mean, Bill Gates, of course, is a very well-known controversial philanthropist. We've done shows on him. Are you suggesting that he only gives money away for vaccinations in Africa to somehow protect his own wealth?
I have no idea why he gives money away.
Well, you're the one who brought up philanthropy, so I'm just curious as and it's always seemed to me that there are some good and some bad philanthropists, like in anything else.
There is a section of the book that talks about the controversy that the Gates Foundation created when it was helping with polio vaccination in Africa, in the shadow of a energy producing thing, an oil company or something, a gas company that was polluting the area and actually causing the early deaths of the people there, the children there. So on the one hand, he was helping with polio, and on the other hand, he was invested in an oil producer, I think it was, who is causing lung problems and causing early deaths among the
It's a very
people.
dark.
Now, this is not something that I made up. This
I know, and
the LA
right.
Times,
No, and we've done shows on the problems with Gates's philanthropy. You're not alone, but it's a very dark take. I mean, you brought up Steve Jobs. His widow now has been another philanthropist, been very generous with her money. She, for example, funds the Atlantic magazine that, I don't know if you read it, but I know a lot of our viewers and listeners do. It seems very good. I'm guessing that she doesn't just fund that because she wants to somehow recycle or protect her wealth. There must be some forms of philanthropy that aren't such a bad thing, Curtis, aren't they?
No, I'm just suggesting that I don't know. I'm not an expert in the business of philanthropy, and I don't know what every corporation does. I'm simply saying that and giving 3 examples of how these forms of progressive politics self-limit in order to protect the source of their wealth.
Are you? Yeah. So is your book on resistance? You said it's not political, but you brought up liberalism and you beat.
It's not conventionally political.
I don't know what conventionally political means, but are you offering an alternative to liberalism? Some people might think, given your critique of philanthropy and corporations, that you're a socialist.
Well, given the current state of affairs, yeah, I'm offering an alternative. That alternative is called dropping out, doing something else, and doing it with other people. And, you know, I mean, an example of that is simply all the local organic farms and the farmers markets have created in most cities in this country a thriving kind of communal well-being. And I say, God bless them. So we need more things like that in more areas of life. But unfortunately, it's really difficult for people because they're in what I would call a money jail. The things that is possible for people to do are limited by the fact that everybody's struggling for money. So that's a problem. I don't have a recipe for getting around money, but I will say that I think money is a prison.
Well, as you say, we're all, for better or worse.
It's a large generalization, Andrew, I know.
Yeah, I mean, it's a bit vague. I mean, you're certainly not the first or last person to describe money as a prison. So coming back to the 60s, I mean, you've argued, I know, that we should forget the Beatles, forget the 60s, but it sounds to me like you're telling everybody to just drop out like they did in the 60s, go and live in a commune, do something completely different, drop out of the system. I'm not being critical here, Curtis. I mean, I think it's an interesting argument. Why not just go back to the counterculture, to the ideal, the promise of dropping out in the 60s that you lived through?
Well, if the form of resistance that I'm advocating is successful, it will look somewhat like the 60s because it will be led by art. But what we're missing right now is that all of the arts are kind of isolated. They're isolated from each other, and they're especially isolated from any social movement that might be in process. And that's what I'd like to see change.
Why, though?
I don't know how desperate this culture is going to have to get before any of these things become plausible.
Right. So to go back to John Taplin, I think in some ways you're on the same page as him, and perhaps in other ways you're not. He wants to go back to the culture of the 60s too, the explicitly political culture. He wants the counterculture to rise again, to challenge the current status quo. Would you agree with that? I mean, John, in his Rolling Stone piece, said that artists have always led resistance in America until Trump and the technocracy took over. Is the problem with the system or with the artists themselves?
Well, it's not until Trump. It started much earlier than Trump. It basically started with Reagan and Reaganomics and the slow, gradual, decades-long withdrawal of public money from public goods like education. Especially education, but also healthcare. And that, I would say, I'm not for returning to the 60s counterculture. I have no interest in that at all, but I am interested in countercultures. But it doesn't have to be a 60s style counterculture, although it will necessarily, I think, and beautifully involve art.
You said that, and you said this, and you've also written it, that telling stories, or we need to tell better stories. That's how we, as above all else, successfully resist. That's what On Resistance is. Tell me a story, Kurt, that somehow captures this.
it's not so much a story as a history, I suppose. But I have spent my life working with other authors in the independent press movement, which started just shortly after, I'd say, the heydays of the 60s. And I helped create a press that still exists. It celebrated its 50th anniversary just a year or so ago, called FC2, originally the Fiction Collective. And it is a publisher of innovative fiction that is run by its authors. And so there's a sense in which my participation in that, and it goes on. I'm thinking of, we're talking now about creating a Substack that would, the problem is it's not visible. So we're talking about creating a Substack that would make the still existing, still thriving artistically independent press movement more visible. And, you know, from the point of view of an individual like myself, what else can you do? I've committed myself to that. And
so you're considering doing a Substack? Substack's been around a while, Curtis. I mean, I've been on it several years. Why are you still thinking about it? Why not just put it on Substack? What's the big deal?
Well, no, I think we're having some difficulties organizing ourselves, but eventually we're going to have a Substack that features independent presses, you know, outside of the money circuit of commercial publishing. And all that stuff still exists. I mean, people complain that there are no good books anymore. Baloney. There are a lot of good books being published by presses like Grey Wolf and Coffee House, and there are a translation press called Open Letter in Rochester. You know, and they do maybe half a dozen books a year, but they're high quality. They're really wonderful books. And the problem is that they don't have any visibility, in part because they don't have any money. So yeah, so maybe Substack will help with that, and so well, that's what we're talking about. But
all this new media does enable people to self-publish, they put their movies up on YouTube.
It's not self-publishing.
Well, but I'm not entirely sure why. So what's your argument? You say there is still good literature around and some of the underground or independent presses. Why aren't people reading them?
Because they're invisible. People don't know about them. And that's because of the dominance of commercial publishing. So, you know, it's a long shot, a long road, whatever. But I know a heck of a lot of people that are committed to it.
Well, your book, Curtis, is on Penguin Random House, which is the largest publisher in the world.
Wait. It's published by Melville House, which is an independent publisher.
But it's distributed by Penguin Random House. When we look at the website, that's where you will find it.
Yeah, but Melville House is an independent publisher. In fact, I don't know how they managed to publish a book like mine, given the politics of the present. You know, why hasn't?
So what are you saying that's so radical or outrageous that people should just drop out? It's not very. Doesn't sound very radical. It's been said before.
I'm not trying to say anything radical or outrageous.
But you said that a mainstream publishing house wouldn't touch your book. Why?
But ask them. I mean, mostly because it's,
but you were the one who said it. I'm just curious why in your mind they wouldn't touch it.
Part of the reason it would be, well, an early review of the book called it playful and fierce. And both of those things, I think, are anathema to commercial publishers, in my experience. The critique is too fierce, and the form in which the book performs, and that's another thing I would want to emphasize about my book, is that it's not just a sort of a thesis and then 4 chapters developing that thesis and then a conclusion that says, see there, told you so. You know, the book is a performance. The book moves. And actually, that's one of the things that I hear quite often from people who like my work. They say they like my work because they don't know what's going to happen next. And that's sort of what you would expect to hear somebody say about a novel, right? And you know, I mean, maybe that's because I am also a novelist. But what I like to do in these things is make them live. A book like this that is a political critique, I want it also to live, because it then becomes an example of what I'm talking about.
What are who are the people you're trying to emulate or continue in their footsteps? I know you write in the book about Sartre, lots of very famous writers, Hemingway,
Yeah.
Nabokov. Are you continuing in some of these men's footsteps? Is this the tradition you're trying to
Hope so.
maintain or resurrect?
I tell you, I was thinking about that because I thought it might come up. And I think my tradition in American literature is Thoreau and Whitman and William Carlos Williams, who I quote several times in the book. And then more recently, a character like John Berger. Berger was, you know, really a model, and I idolized the guy's work. You know, he was a great art critic. He was a Marxist, and he wrote poetry. He wrote great, lively, living books. Yeah, Berger.
Do you said that he was a Marxist. Do you consider yourself a Marxist? I know you've written about the need for capitalism to have workers who, what you say, are stupid smart. Are you against capitalism? Are you a revolutionary?
No, I'm not a revolutionary. I never forget. Ask that question again.
Well, you brought up when you were talking about Berger, the great art critic.
Oh, he's a Marxist, right?
Anglo-American. You said he was a Marxist. Are you a Marxist? I mean, you know, when you think about the manifesto, you've written a manifesto, which of course brings to mind the Communist Manifesto, the great manifesto of Marxism.
You know, there is no Marxism really, because there's too many varieties of Marxism. The variety of Marxism that has taught me is well, in particular, Marx's early essays, like the economic and philosophic manuscripts of 1844. This was well before his book on Capital. And it's a very humanistic book because the main focus is not bringing down capital. The main focus is on alienation and the problem of alienation and how capitalism alienates human beings from their own nature. And the tradition of Western Marxism that moved through, say, figures like Herbert Marcuse, who was practically, you know, he was a culture hero in the United States in the 60s and early 70s. That's the sort of thing that they, you know, Marcuse wrote a book called One Dimensional Man. And his argument was basically, let's not be one dimensional. You know, capitalism makes us one dimensional. It makes us basically, you know, our whole lives orbit around consumption and money. Let's not do that. So he was a real spokesman for that, for the...
are you in that camp? Would you agree with him?
Oh, of course.
But again, I mean, Marcuse has written it. The Frankfurt School's come and gone. The 60s have come and gone. What are you saying, Curtis, that's in any way new in On Resistance? It sounds as if, and maybe there's nothing new to be said. It sounds as if you're just recycling what's already been said. I live above the Haight-Ashbury district in San Francisco. Sometimes one goes down there and it looks like an attempt to reinvent the 1960s. What are you saying new in this book?
Well, a good part of what's new in the book is the way that it's written. I mean, it is playful. I mean, part of it is fierce in its criticism of certain aspects of capitalism, but then a lot of it is generating story. You know, and the structure of the book is, you know, it moves. And so if I succeed in making the book move, then I can perhaps reinvigorate ideas, no matter how old they are and how familiar they are. don't see a problem with trying to reinvigorate the worthy ideas of the past. Why does it have to be a new idea that no one's ever had before? You tell me that.
Well, I'm curious. So basically what you're doing in On Resistance is sort of writing in, as you say, a playful, engaging, original way, almost like a novelist,
Right.
to get people to what? Think about how to
Yes.
resist, how to drop out. Is that a fair way of putting it?
Yeah, thank you. Very
good. So finally, what conclusion? I mean, when people pick this book up, it's On Resistance, a manifesto. When they've put it down at the end, and it is, I've been reading it, it's very readable, very engaging. What do you want people to do? It's supposed to be a manifesto. I mean, maybe you should have called it an anti-manifesto, Curtis. What are you calling for?
To call it a manifesto is, it's playful to a degree, but I'm making manifest. That's all manifestos do. They don't necessarily represent a movement or an organization or anything else. They make manifest what you think. That's all I'm doing in this book, is making manifest what I think for the final time in this life.
What do you mean the final time?
I'm not writing any more nonfiction. I'm 75 years old. I got novels to write.
But when people put down this book, having read it, what do you want them to do? What would you like them to do? But you're putting ideas into their mind. You're creating narratives. You're telling stories. Give me a couple of scenarios. I see that you're not some sort of doctrinal thinker who's telling people to do a specific thing. You've talked about being against philanthropy and capitalism and liberalism. What do you want people to do?
I want them to think about what they might do. It's not for me. It's not for me to dictate what they ought to do. Then I do get in trouble with the Communist Manifesto, which does, I think, tend to try to dictate to people how this thing ought to work. I wrote this book in the spirit of play. I hope people leave it in the spirit of play.
Well, there you have it. The book is out. Curtis White's On Resistance, a manifesto. I think, Curtis, we might have called it a manifesto with a question mark, or maybe in italics, because it's not quite what many people think of as a manifesto.
That's okay.
But it's out. Congratulations, Curtis. And thank you so much. That was a fascinating conversation.
And Andrew, this was a great conversation. Thanks so much. Seriously. Blessings.
Hi, this is Andrew again. Thank you so much for listening or watching the show. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe. We're on Substack, YouTube, Apple, Spotify, all the platforms. And I'd be very curious as to your comments as well on what you think of the show, how it can be improved, and the kinds of guests that you would enjoy hearing or listening to in future. Thank you again.